She was 3 words away from crying in public for the first time in 11 years when she grabbed the sleeve of the most dangerous man in the room. Waverly Hurst had catered to billionaires, plated dessert courses for sitting senators, and once talked a kitchen fire down in 12 minutes without calling 911. She did not panic, except that Reed Moorfield had just walked into the Callaway Grand's private reception floor, wearing the same charcoal suit he'd worn the night he broke up with her, and he was smiling at her like she was still a joke he hadn't finished telling. "Please," she said, her hand closing around a black wool sleeve, "just say you're with me." The man belonging to that sleeve looked down at her. He was not someone you grabbed without thinking. His name was Emilio Ferrante, and his legitimate title was chairman of the Ferrante Hospitality Group. Restaurants, hotels, a wine import company with 17 locations up the East Coast. His other title was not printed on any business card. His dark eyes moved from her face to the man across the room, who was already tracking them, smirking. Then he set his whiskey glass on the nearest tray with the kind of calm that didn't come from being relaxed. It came from being entirely unafraid. "I'm not just with you," Emilio said. "I'm yours." He said it the way a man closes a contract, quietly, finally, without room for a counteroffer. He wasn't performing a kindness. He was making a decision. And Waverly Hurst, executive pastry chef and the only woman in this building who had ever made a room of Michelin judges applaud mid-bite, had absolutely no idea what she had just started. Waverly had not set out to become the kind of woman who needed rescuing. She had set out to become a chef, which meant she had spent the last decade waking up at 4 in the morning, burning her forearms on oven racks, and learning to tune out every person who suggested, with their eyes or their voices, that a woman her size did not belong behind a professional stove. She was a size 22. She had a James Beard Award on the shelf above her spice rack. She had a recurring nightmare that someone would put those 2 facts next to each other in a review, and she would have to keep pretending it didn't sting. Reed Moorfield had been the one person she thought saw past it. A corporate litigation attorney, sharp and golden, the kind of man who made rooms feel smaller when he walked in. They had been together for 2 years. He had called her brilliant. He had called her extraordinary. He had told her in the specific language of a man who wanted her to believe him that he loved every part of her. Then his firm made him a senior partner, and his idea of every part of her quietly, surgically changed. The breakup had been framed as a lifestyle incompatibility. He had used the phrase, "the optics of our dynamic," and she had spent 6 months convincing herself that was a real thing. It was only at his firm's holiday party where she overheard him explain to a colleague that his previous girlfriend wasn't exactly camera-ready for the partnership track, that she understood what the optics of their dynamic had actually meant. She had rebuilt herself after that in the only language she trusted, work. She took the executive pastry chef position at Aurelius, a tasting menu restaurant in Midtown that did not have a single mediocre review in its 4-year existence. She created a dessert program that food critics called visceral. She made sugar sculptures that made grown men go quiet. She did not date. She did not apologize for the space she took up in a room. She had been doing fine. Until tonight. The event was the Northeast Culinary Foundation Gala, a black-tie fundraiser held annually in the private ballroom of the Callaway Grand Hotel on 5th Avenue. Waverly was there because Aurelius was one of the presenting restaurants, meaning she had spent 12 hours on her feet, constructing 200 individual dessert plates, now being transferred by her sous chef while she circulated. She did not know Reed would be there. His firm, she learned approximately 45 seconds after he materialized at the edge of the cocktail crowd, represented one of the gala's corporate sponsors. He found her near the dessert display. He always had a talent for finding her in a room, even when she was standing very still and hoping not to be found. Waverly. He said her name the way he always had, with a tiny rise at the end, like it surprised him every time. "You're doing the desserts." I'm the executive pastry chef, she said, so yes. His eyes moved over her the way they used to, except now she could read the inventory in it, the assessment. She was wearing a black wrap dress because black was professional and the kitchen had been hot, and she hadn't thought about what she was going to look like when she walked out of it. His mouth made a shape that wasn't quite a smile. Still doing the whole big pastry chef thing, he said, really committing to the aesthetic. She felt the old familiar heat crawl up the back of her neck, the heat she had learned to recognize as shame and was still learning to recognize as rage instead. I didn't see your name on any of the courses, she said, keeping her voice level. No, I'm here with the firm, and Courtney. He glanced back toward the crowd. A tall, narrow woman in red was laughing at something across the room. She's been asking to come to one of these. He looked back at Waverly with a particular smile. She actually goes to the gym. It was such a specific cruelty, so deliberate in its precision. She had been managing the kitchen equivalent of a military operation for 12 hours, and he had just weaponized "she actually goes to the gym" into a complete sentence. Her throat tightened. Her eyes, to her absolute fury, began to sting. She turned sideways. Not toward the exit, not toward her team, just turned, some animal part of her brain reaching for the nearest solid thing, and her hand closed around a black wool sleeve. In another life, she would have apologized immediately, stepped back, smoothed it over with professionalism. But her eyes were burning, and Reed was still 3 feet behind her, and the man whose sleeve she had grabbed was looking at her with an expression that was not pity, which was the only thing that kept her from dissolving entirely. "Please," she said, "just say you're with me." Emilio Ferrante looked at her for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then his gaze moved past her shoulder, found Reed, measured him in approximately 2 seconds, and returned. "I'm not just with you," he said, "I'm yours." He moved his arm, the one she was holding, and placed it around her waist. The warmth of it was startling. He was not tentative about it. He pulled her flush against his side like it was something he had done before, like it was a simple fact, and turned to face Reed with an expression of total, serene authority. Reed blinked. Whatever he had been about to say dissolved somewhere between his throat and his mouth. "She was in the middle of something," Emilio said. His voice was low. New York with something older underneath it, something that had not been softened by American real estate or American manners. "You interrupted her." Reed opened his mouth. "I wasn't asking," Emilio said. Reed closed his mouth, looked at Waverly, looked at the man beside her, made a decision that was probably the first genuinely intelligent one he had made all evening, and excused himself. In the wake of that departure, Waverly stood very still and tried to remember how to breathe. "Thank you," she managed. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have grabbed you. "What's your name?" Emilio asked. She told him. He repeated it back like he was deciding something about it. Then he said, "Come with me for 10 minutes. I'd like to talk to you." They sat in the hotel's smaller lounge off the main ballroom, and Emilio Ferrante told her something that took her 90 seconds to fully process. He needed a cover. Specifically, he needed the appearance of a stable civilian relationship, something that would complicate the federal government's current working theory that he was an unstable, isolated criminal enterprise with no personal accountability. His attorney had advised this 3 weeks ago. His problem was that any woman already in his world carried her own complications. "You have no record," he said. "You're a respected professional with a public profile. Your name is attached to a James Beard Award and a restaurant that has not had a single health code violation in 4 years. He said this like a qualification checklist. "And you clearly need something from me as well." "I needed you to help me avoid a 30-second conversation," Waverly said. "I wasn't planning anything beyond that." "Then plan further." He looked at her steadily. "I need a woman on my arm at public events for the next 3 months, not a performance, something real enough to hold up under scrutiny." You attend, you're introduced as someone I'm serious about. You live in my building while this federal review runs its course." He paused. "In return, I deal with Reed Moorfield." Waverly went very quiet. "I don't need you to deal with anyone," she said carefully. "You don't need it," he agreed, "but you want it. And that man just tried to make you feel like an aesthetic choice gone wrong in front of 200 professional peers because you once had the bad judgment to love him. His voice had not changed in temperature, but something in it had. That kind of behavior has consequences, whether you accept my offer or not." She looked at him for a long time. He looked back without impatience. 3 months, she said. 3 months. You don't control my schedule. I still run my kitchen. I wouldn't want you not to. He said it like it would be a waste. Your work is the reason I know your name. I had your chocolate cardamom tart at a benefit dinner last March. I've been trying to find out who made it ever since. Waverly had not expected that. It showed on her face because something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. "Deal," she said. The first week in his building was an exercise in recalibrating her understanding of the word private. Emilio's apartment occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in Tribeca. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, a kitchen better equipped than some professional spaces she had worked in, and a level of security so quiet it took her 2 days to notice it was there. He did not hover. He did not treat her like a prop, but he paid attention in ways that accumulated. On the 4th day, he walked into the kitchen while she was stressed, testing a new caramel recipe on her off hours, watched her for a while without interrupting, and then said, "You don't eat while you cook." "Chef's taste," she said. "They don't eat." "You haven't tasted this one either." She hadn't. Old habit. Reed had made a comment once about chefs who obviously sampled too much, and she had stopped tasting her own food for 3 months before she noticed what she was doing. She picked up a spoon. The caramel was perfect. "You have a better palate than anyone I've met in 20 years of restaurants," Emilio said, still watching her. "That's not a compliment. That's a fact." She didn't know what to do with that, so she made another batch of caramel. The second shift happened when the stylist arrived. Emilio had arranged for her to be fitted for the upcoming Ferrante Hospitality charity dinner, their first real public outing. The stylist arrived with a rack of options in the neutrals Waverly usually defaulted to, and Emilio appeared from his study, glanced at the rack and said, "No, bring the other options. These are the standard conservative selections." "She is not standard." He looked at Waverly. "What color do you actually like?" She had not been asked that in a professional styling context before. She thought about it honestly. Wine, deep wine, or cobalt. The next morning, a gown arrived. Wine red, off-shoulder, structured at the waist in a way that made her silhouette feel like architecture rather than something to apologize for. She stood in front of the full-length mirror and did not immediately reach for a cardigan. Emilio stood in the doorway. He said nothing for a moment. "You're looking at yourself like you're still deciding whether you deserve to," he said. "I'm just. You look like you were built for that dress." He walked over and stood beside her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Or the dress was built for you. Either way, no one else is going to see anything in that room except you." She had been told she was beautiful before, by people who needed something from her, or who were trying to soften a separate truth. This was different. He said it the way he said most things, like a conclusion reached by evidence, not by generosity. For the first time in a very long time, she believed it. The Ferrante charity dinner was held in the private event space of a Tribeca hotel, 52 tables, the kind of room where the centerpieces cost more than some catering contracts. Waverly arrived on Emilio's arm in the wine-red gown, and she was not imagining the shift in the room's attention when they walked in. Emilio had a presence that preceded him like weather, but people were looking at her, at the gown, at the particular ease with which she moved through the room. at the way his hand rested at the small of her back, like it had always lived there. Reed was there. His firm was a co-sponsor. She had known he might be. She had decided in the back of the car on the way over that this was fine. She had been preparing food for rooms like this her entire career. She was not afraid of the room. She was seated with two food journalists she respected, a hotel group CFO asking Emilio pointed questions about the Ferrante portfolio, and she noticed this approximately 40 seconds after sitting down. Reed and his girlfriend Courtney, 3 seats to her left. Reed's eyes had gone strange the moment they walked in. She watched him recalibrate, watched him decide how to handle this, and watched that decision fall apart entirely when Emilio leaned over during the first course, said something near her ear, and she laughed, genuinely, unexpectedly, a laugh she hadn't planned. She caught Reed staring. She looked away first, not because she was flustered, because he wasn't worth the continued attention. During cocktail hour, Reed found her at the bar. "So this is a thing," he said, his voice carrying the edge of a man 2 drinks in and regretting he cannot have a third. "You and Ferrante." "Yes," she said. "Since when?" "Since it's none of your business." He stepped closer. "Waverly, come on. A man like that doesn't. I mean, you have to see how this looks." "How does it look?" she asked. She kept her voice pleasant. She was curious what he would actually say. "It looks like you're trying to make a point." His eyes moved over her, and they weren't kind. They never had been, she realized. She had just been too close to see it. "You found some rich guy to show up with so you could." "Reed." The voice came from directly behind him, low, without inflection. Emilio had not been visible a moment ago. He was very visible now. He placed one hand on Reed's shoulder, not aggressively, not showy, just the specific weight of someone establishing a geometric fact about where they stood in relation to each other. "She's not trying to make a point," Emilio said. "She doesn't need to. You're the one who's been making points with his eyes for the last 40 minutes. His grip tightened, almost imperceptibly. "The last man who spoke to her the way you did in this room is not someone I'd recommend using as a template for how things turn out." Reed said nothing. His girlfriend was watching from across the room. "Enjoy your dinner," Emilio said. He offered Waverly his arm. They walked back to the table. And that would have been the end of it, except that Reed Moorfield was at his core, a man who could not tolerate being out-positioned without attempting to recover lost ground. The second round of cocktails had just been cleared when Waverly noticed something wrong with the wine. She had not been planning to notice anything. She was in the middle of a conversation with one of the food journalists about fermentation timelines, which was exactly the kind of conversation she found genuinely interesting. And the glass of Barolo she had picked up was nearly at her lips when something stopped her. Her palate. 11 years of working with flavors until they told her things other people couldn't hear. She set the glass down, picked it up again, brought it close without drinking. The tannins were wrong, not spoiled wrong, wrong in a way that didn't happen accidentally. Underneath the oak and fruit was something that did not belong there. Faint, specific. The kind of faint and specific that her training recognized before her brain could name it. She put her hand on Emilio's arm under the table. He stilled immediately. "Don't drink the wine," she said, low enough that it went nowhere beyond his ear. "Specifically this glass, something is in it." She felt him go very still, not with alarm. With the composure she was starting to recognize as his natural state under actual pressure, which was different, she now understood, from his natural state under social pressure, which was simply boredom. "How certain are you?" he asked. "Certain enough." He did not question her. He set his glass down with the unhurried ease of a man who was simply no longer thirsty, and within 30 seconds had made brief eye contact with someone across the room. Security, she realized, who had been present the entire evening without her ever registering them, and the dinner continued. Except that it didn't quite. 20 minutes later, 3 men who had arrived as part of the catering staff moved toward the table from different angles. Emilio's hand closed around her wrist under the tablecloth. "We're going to stand up now," he said quietly, "and walk toward the kitchen." They did. The room fractured 2 seconds after they cleared the doors. The chaos in the ballroom was brief. Emilio's people were already there, had already been there, and the 3 men were contained before most guests fully understood what was happening. Waverly found herself in the hotel's service corridor, her back against a concrete wall. Emilio, standing in front of her, with his body angled outward, while one of his men relayed information through an earpiece. "The wine," he said to her, still watching the corridor. "How did you know?" "Bitter almond underneath the tannins. Very faint. Someone who didn't work with flavors professionally wouldn't catch it." She was aware her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat against the concrete wall. "Someone was trying to poison you." "Yes." He turned then and looked at her. "You may have just saved my life." "I caught a bad wine note," she said. "Don't make it cinematic." Something shifted in his face. It was almost a smile. "All right." They spent the night at a property he maintained outside the city, a house in Connecticut whose security perimeter told her it was not his casual overnight choice. A doctor came and went. Emilio sat in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, his jacket off, and let her make tea because she needed to do something with her hands. "They knew exactly where you'd be seated," she said, "and which glass would be yours." He nodded. "That's not public knowledge." "No." She thought about it. The seating arrangements had been circulated to the event's co-sponsors for logistical purposes, which meant anyone with access to that communication chain could have known. Which meant, "Reed's firm is a co-sponsor," she said. Emilio's expression told her she was not wrong. "He wouldn't," she said, and then more honestly a second later, "Would he?" "A man who loses his sense of control can rationalize a great deal," Emilio said. "He made a call tonight. We have it on record. He reached out to a competing organization, the Dragon Network, operating out of Brooklyn, who have been trying to access my distribution channels for 2 years. He met her eyes. He gave them the seating chart. He did not know you would be seated next to me, but he knew you would be in the room." The information landed in her chest like something physical. "He was willing to put me in a room with." She stopped. "Yes." She sat with that for a long moment. The man who had told her she wasn't camera ready. The man who had used "she actually goes to the gym" as a weapon in a professional ballroom. He had handed a seating chart to people willing to poison a glass of wine because his ego had not recovered from watching her walk into a room looking the way she had looked that night. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Emilio looked at her with the patience of someone who has already made every decision and is simply waiting for events to confirm them. "His firm holds 3 retainer clients through holding companies I control. Those relationships end tomorrow, effective immediately, citing ethical concerns. His partnership will not survive that." He paused. "The call itself, I've already forwarded it to the federal investigators building a case against the Dragon Network. They have been looking for a civilian link for 18 months. Reed Moorfield just handed himself to them, gift-wrapped. "You're using him to close your own federal case," she said. "I'm removing 2 problems simultaneously." He studied her face. "Do you pity him?" She thought about it honestly. Reed in his charcoal suit, Reed and his optics of our dynamic, Reed with a phone in his hand, reading a seating chart to people who used poisoned wine. "No," she said. "I don't feel anything for him. I haven't in a long time. I was just still letting him make me feel small." She looked at her tea. "That's the part I'm angry about, not him, that I kept letting him." Emilio said nothing for a moment. Then, "You caught the taste in the glass." "That's not." "You used what you actually are, what you've spent 11 years building, to do something I could not have done myself, in a room full of my people who are trained specifically for this." He was looking at her the way he had looked at her in front of the mirror. Like a conclusion that had been a long time coming, you are not a woman who lets anyone make her small. You are a woman who occasionally forgets to remind them. She watched the news 3 days later from his living room in Tribeca. Reed Moorfield was arrested at his firm's Midtown offices on charges of conspiracy and racketeering. His name appeared on the chyron alongside his partnership title, which would not exist by end of business that day. His face, when the cameras caught him outside the building, was the face of a man who had made a calculation and lost every variable he hadn't thought to account for. Waverly felt, very cleanly, nothing. And then she felt something that took a moment to name: relief, not triumph, just the specific lightness of a weight she had been carrying so long she had forgotten to notice it was there. Emilio came in and stood behind her chair. His hands rested on her shoulders, a habit that had developed in the last week, the particular warmth of it, the steadiness. "It's over," she said. "Most of it." He paused. "The federal review on my end is resolved. The Dragon case gives the investigators what they needed, and my cooperation puts me in a very different position than where I started. A beat. Our arrangement has served its purpose." Something in her chest went careful and small. "Then I should go back to Aurelius," she said. She kept her voice even, professional, the way she spoke when she was plating something, and her hands needed to be steadier than her feelings. "I've been running the kitchen remotely all week. My team needs me back in person." She started to stand. His hands didn't move. "I didn't say I wanted you to go," he said. She stilled. "The arrangement served its purpose," he said again. "That doesn't mean I want what came after it to end." His thumbs pressed very slightly against the base of her neck. She felt it through her whole spine. "I want you to stay, not as a cover, not as part of anything I need from you professionally or legally. Because you made tea at 2 in the morning and sat across from me without flinching. Because you have the best palate of anyone I've encountered in a life, with no shortage of encounters. Because watching you work in my kitchen for 1 week has been quietly one of the more extraordinary things I've experienced." She turned to look at him. "Emilio." "I know what I am," he said. "I am not offering you something simple or safe. I'm asking whether you want what's real." She looked at him for a long time, the man who had told her to plan further, the man who had looked at a rack of neutral gowns and said, "No, bring the other options." The man who had stood beside her in front of a mirror and said you were built for that dress, and meant every syllable as a statement of observable fact. The man who had not spent a single moment of the past 3 weeks trying to make her smaller. "What does real look like?" she asked. He reached into his jacket and set a key on the side table next to her, old-fashioned, brass. A small tag read Ferrante, Via Montalto, Siena. "There's a property in Tuscany," he said. "I've been renovating the kitchen for 2 years. I don't cook. I've been trying to understand what I was renovating it for." She looked at the key. She looked at him. "That's a very long way to go to tell someone you'd like them to stay," she said. "I've been told reliably that I am not good at short distances." She picked up the key. It was warm from his pocket. "I'll need to give Aurelius 3 weeks' notice," she said. "I know. And I'm finishing the winter dessert menu before I go. I'm not letting anyone else write it." "I wouldn't ask you to." She turned the key over in her palm, thought about a kitchen in Siena, about the particular weight of hands that were steady on her shoulders when nothing else was, about what it had felt like to walk into that ballroom and let people look and not need the looking to feel like surviving. "Okay," she said. Emilio's expression did not change dramatically, but something behind it settled. The specific resolution of a man who had been, without fully admitting it to himself, waiting. He took the key from her hand, closed her fingers around it, and held them there. "Okay," he said. Waverly Hurst had spent 11 years becoming someone extraordinary at her work and invisible in her life. She had learned to fit into rooms by never taking up the space she was entitled to, and she had called that professionalism and told herself it was fine. She walked out of those years in a wine-red gown on a night when someone had tried to poison the wrong glass, saved by the one palette in the room sharp enough to matter, held steady by hands that had decided, before she had, that she was worth every complicated consequence. She was not invisible. She had never been. She had just been standing in rooms with the wrong lighting.